Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Goshen County Republican Party's United States House of Representatives Candidate Forum here on the campus of Eastern Wyoming College in Torrington, Wyoming. Candidates, we wish to extend to you our thanks once again for appearing here tonight and being accessible to the electorate. And we want to thank the audience here in attendance in this auditorium as well as at home listening to us live on KGOS and KERM in the local area, as well as KPIN in Pinedale, and streaming live on the World Wide Web at kgoskerm.com. We also want to thank our radio partners for broadcasting tonight's forum, as well as Eastern Wyoming College for hosting us. Candidates, the rules for tonight's format are very straightforward. This is not a debate, but rather a public interview conducted by the county GOP. You each will have a 2-minute opening statement. Questions will be asked by me, your humble moderator, and responses to those questions will be limited to 1 minute and 30 seconds. You will be allowed a 30-second rebuttal. However, that time for rebuttal will come after all candidates have answered the initial question. At the end of all questions, you will be given a 1-minute closing statement. Here at the moderator's desk, the County Party GOP Chairman, Mr. Corey Steinmetz, will act as the official timekeeper and will notify you of the time remaining on your statement, should you need them. If you have gone over your allotted time, you will hear this sound, at which time we would like you to quickly bring your statement to a close. We also ask that you please be attentive to your position in the order of questioning. For example, while one candidate is answering their question, we ask that you quietly approach the opposite lectern as you await your turn. We will also take a short break around 8 o'clock and resume the final portion of the forum after 10 minutes. Candidates, prior to the start of tonight's forum, you drew a number indicating your seated position on the dais. We will begin with the candidate who drew the number 1 ticket for their opening statement and continue in order from there, that being Ms. Liz Cheney. After all candidates are finished with their opening, question number 1 will first be directed to the candidate who drew the number 2 ticket, that being Mr. Paul Pad, and continue numerically from there. With that, let us begin. Ms. Cheney, your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Shane and Corey, and it's great to be back in Goshen County. I'm particularly pleased because I've got my son Philip here with me tonight, who graduated from elementary school yesterday, and a child who's willing to spend his first day of summer vacation campaigning with his mom as somebody who earns a lot of brownie points, so I'm very grateful for that. And it is precisely because of Philip and because of all of our kids and grandkids that I'm worried so deeply about the nation and about our state. We're facing tremendous challenges in terms of our freedoms. We're facing challenges in terms of the massive overreach we're seeing from the federal government at every level. We've got a president who does not believe that the Constitution really is a guarantee of our rights. He fundamentally believes it's a list of suggestions that he can overrule at will. And we've got to have a representative in Washington who's able to hit the ground running on day one, who's able to begin immediately the work of having a regulatory revolution, being in a position where we're able to fundamentally sunset many of the regulations that are on the books from agencies like the EPA, the BLM, and where we're able to make sure that any new regulations involve Congress so that Congress has taken back its authority. This president has been the worst president in American history, and it is going to take a huge amount of heavy lifting to undo the damage that he's done. And it will require the ability to bring a national focus and attention to our issues. It will require somebody who fundamentally understands and believes in our First Amendment rights, our freedom of conscience, our Second Amendment rights, somebody who's willing to stand up against federal overreach across the board, including in areas like Common Core. As a mom with kids in Wyoming public schools, I see the damage that that has done every single day of the school year and before that, and I'm absolutely dedicated to repealing it. So I'd like to ask for your vote on August 16th. It's a hugely important election. I will be the person who can lead on these issues, who can bring a national attention and focus to them so that we can restore our rights and our freedoms here in Wyoming and begin again to lead by the values that we hold so dear. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Cheney. Mr. Pad, your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you for being here this evening. Thomas Jefferson once said that that we in America do not have a government by the majority. We have a government of the majority who participate. And by you showing up here this evening, it shows that you're willing to participate, and I thank you so very much for that. As I said, my name's Paul Pad. I live in Casper, Wyoming. I've been there a little over 32 years now. My wife and I had moved back there after we had to leave the state for a while when my mother passed away back in Michigan, but we got back, and this is where we wanted to raise our family. So to answer the question, no, I wasn't born in Wyoming, but nobody asked me where I wanted to be born during the first 9 months of my life, so I'm a Wyomingite by choice rather than simply by chance. Now, I got into this race because I feel that Congress has been inundated for too many years, Washington itself, with career politicians and attorneys, and they've created a stagnant Congress where very little, if anything, seems to get accomplished. Now, our founders intended for us to have a citizen legislature, and that's what we need to get back to, not a legislature full of professional politicians that's seemingly more interested in the next election or their next climb up the next rung on the political ladder. I believe that what we need to do and what our next representative needs to work towards is I believe that America needs to declare its energy independence, and by that we need to eliminate the moratorium on the coal lease moratorium, and we need to stabilize our oil prices. I believe we need to secure our borders, enforce our immigration laws, and practice the sanctuary cities. I also believe that we need to refortify and re-strengthen our military, and our veterans should never have to worry about the benefits or health care that they were promised, and we should never allow our veterans to live homeless on the street while we pay to house those that chose to enter our borders illegally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pad. Mr. Sentney, your opening statement, please.
My name is Jason Adam Sentney, and I'm running for U.S. House because we have some fundamental problems in this country. A little bit about my background. I was born right here in Torrington, Wyoming, probably about a half a mile from this very spot. Growing up here in Goshen County, you really learn what it's like to enjoy that sense of community, that neighborly spirit that takes place right here and all across Wyoming. Shortly after high school, in 1996, I joined the United States Marine Corps. I believed in serving my country then, and I still believe in serving my country now. Currently, I'm a correctional officer. I'm also a volunteer firefighter, and I serve at the governor's pleasure on the Air Quality Small Business Compliance Advisory Panel. Part of the reason I'm running today is because I look at the things that this current administration has done, the rampant federal overreach using the EPA and the BLM, and I believe that we need a Marine in Washington that's going to fight for the people of Wyoming. I also believe that we need fundamental changes in our current tax system. For over 100 years, we've been dealing with the federal income tax, and it has reached over 74,000 pages of tax code. I believe in simplifying that. I believe in repealing the federal income tax, going with the national sales tax, in which we already have the infrastructure in place to collect that. We can end the IRS, and we can actually use the Wyoming Department of Revenue to collect those taxes. So if you're interested in this, you could go to setneyforwyoming.org. I look forward to earning your vote, and I look forward to earning your support on August 16th. Thank you very much for your time. God bless you all, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sentney. Mr. Stubbson, your opening statement.
Thank you. My name's Tim Stubbson. I'm from Casper, and I'm running to be your next congressman. My wife, Susan, and our two boys, we make our home in Casper, and they've joined me on the trail today and on this first day of what is their summer campation, as they've come to call it. But you know, I'm running for a couple of reasons. One, I think that we need to have a representative from the state of Wyoming that knows the issues of Wyoming and that knows the people of Wyoming. I'm also running because Washington, quite frankly, is broken. And over the last 9 years that I've served in the Wyoming legislature, I've really gotten a front row seat at how broken the federal government is and how difficult it makes it for those of us in Wyoming to solve Wyoming problems in a way that makes sense for our state. I'm also running because I think that we need solutions to problems, not merely campaign promises. If you look at my record over the last 9 years in the Wyoming legislature, what you'll see is a couple of things. You'll see a focus on solving the real problems of the state of Wyoming. You'll see a record of addressing coal, of making sure that we're investing in clean coal technologies. of making sure that we're trimming regulatory burden in the state of Wyoming so we can build additional facilities, hire additional people, and you'll see a focus on making sure that our government lives within its means. And those are the same sort of priorities that I will take to Washington, D.C. I will also take a priority of making sure that we have a government that actually listens to its people and a government that responds to the dreams of its citizens, because right now we have a federal government that quite frankly is more focused on political fundraising than it is on the needs of the people of Wyoming and the people of the United States. So thank you again for coming in out of the warmth and for joining us this afternoon, and I look forward to spending some time with you throughout the afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Stubson. Mr. Christensen.
My name is Leland Christensen, and I'm running to serve the people of Wyoming. And I believe if you're going to represent the people in the people's house, you ought to be one of them with a shared background, shared experiences, and a common understanding. As for me, our family's been here a long time, but I want to look back at what I've been able to do. I grew up in an ag family, went into small business. I was a logger, and I saw the impact of the federal government. Went through regulation, they crushed that industry. I joined the National Guard and served 15 years in the 19th Special Forces. Wore another uniform in Wyoming, and that of a Wyoming lawman for 20 years. I've been elected twice as a county commissioner, 2 times as a state senator. Always out there looking for ways to take on the tough challenges and leave things better than we found it. Now we're facing some tough challenges. We look at our rocketing debt. We look at the way the government overreach and the control of the lands and some of these challenges out there. We see our attack on the Second Amendment. We see government getting into places it doesn't belong and failing at places it does belong. With my background, one of the things I learned in the military on the teams was you can be a great fighter, but in order to win, you had to work together. I took those lessons I learned in business and in the military into the county commission, and I've got a track record. I know how to adjust when things are tight and invest when we're doing well. And that's where we're at in Wyoming. We've got to make some adjustments. In the federal government, we're spending money we don't have, and we're putting that on our youth. We're putting that into the next generation. One of the things I believe that clearly separates me from all the other candidates is my background. I've been tested and I've been proven. I know how to work with people. I know how to work in creating law and stopping bad law. I think that is the big definer. You're going to hear a lot of words and promises, but I think in Wyoming we look at character, commitment, and I've got that track record. I know how to do this. I'll ask for your vote. Leland Christensen, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Mr. Consmo, your opening statement.
Good evening. It's a great honor to be here in Torrington tonight and to speak with you about the future of our great state. My name is Mike Consmo. I live in Powell and I teach at Northwest College. I jumped into this race because I wanted to help our students. All across our state, our students graduate from our high schools, our community colleges, and our university, and they can't find jobs, and they have to move out of our state. This is because our state economy is failing. It's getting worse, all our industries are suffering, and everyone is hurting. That's why in this election, I believe there is one overwhelming priority. We need to fix our state economy, and this is how we do it. We need to stabilize our energy industries with a positive message. We need to diversify our state economy with new industries and new jobs. We need to create new jobs for our students and our unemployed so that they don't have to abandon our local communities. On a national level, we need to reduce our federal deficit and we need to balance our budget. On an international level, we need to reestablish our nation as the leading nation in foreign affairs so that we can stabilize the world so that our global economy can grow. These are difficult things, but I'm willing to fight for these things. And if you share a vision that we need to save and strengthen our state economy, vote Consmo for Congress on August 16th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Consmo. Mr. Rammel.
Good evening, Torrington, and all of the people listening on the radio as far north as Crook County, and to the good people over in Sublette. My name is Rex Rammel. I'm a veterinarian from Gillette. And happy to return to Torrington, where we called it home just a few years ago. I was the chief veterinarian for Torrington livestock markets, and I've got to tell you, it's nice to come back to Torrington and not be expected to preg check some cows. My daughter graduated from this very college. We're very proud of her. She's with me tonight. Her name's Jessica. And we see some old friends in the audience. It's nice to come back to Torrington. It's a great place, and Wyoming's a great place. It's been a pleasure to get to know so many people. We got a lot of challenges facing us. We were interviewed just before this meeting started, and the question was asked, since we're only one of 435 in Congress, how would we make a difference? And my answer to that is very simple. You got to be able to stand on the floor of Congress and have some credibility. And people aren't going to respect you if you don't know what you're talking about. This is a natural resource state, from the mining sector to cattle, grazing, water issues, farming issues, logging issues. The only way we're going to get any respect back in D.C. if a man stands up and has some credibility on the floor. Otherwise, they're not going to listen to you no matter what your name is. I look forward to a vigorous debate tonight, and I appreciate Corey Steinmetz and all of the GOP people in Goshen County that has put this on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Randall. And finally, Mr. Smith, your opening statement.
Okay. Well, howdy, everybody. Thank you, Torrington, for having us, and everybody out there in Radio Land. My name is Darren Smith. I grew up in this. I'm born and raised in the state of Wyoming. I chose to go to school here. I met my wife at the University of Wyoming. Alicia's right there. Raise your hand, Alicia, say, and wave to everybody. My 5 children we've raised here. We've chose to live in this state. We ride for the brand. And I'm an executive for a national nonprofit organization. And with that organization, we drill about 1,000 water wells a year for people without fresh water. We send doctors on about 1,000 medical missions. And what I've learned is that oftentimes simple solutions are the answer to complex problems, and I believe that's the case in Washington, D.C. right now. Also, I've had a ton of international experience that would help me for this position. We take the private sector mindset for the organization I work for, and when $1 goes into that organization, 90 cents makes it out the other side to the people and the projects that it's designated for, and I want to export that same mindset to Washington, D.C. My Wyoming values are this: I am pro-God, unapologetically pro-God, pro-family, pro-business, pro-oil and gas, pro-gun, pro-coal, pro-agriculture, and pro-veteran, and I'm for every right that the Constitution guarantees us. And I believe that our best days are ahead in Wyoming, but we got to pull back the government overreach. In Wyoming, as a people, we are the most free, least regulated, least taxed people on earth. But right now we should have a great manufacturing base, and we should lead the country in producing energy, but we're not, because everything lives and dies on leadership. And right now we need solid leadership. I have a plan to put trains back, get the trains moving and put people back to work. And if you'll go to my website at mrsmithgoestowashington.com and check us out. I look forward to the debate tonight, and I ask for your vote on August 16th.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Pad, you'll begin the first round of questioning, going to Mr. Centeny with answering the same question, but as in the second position. The first question will be this. Mr. Pad, how is the Declaration of Independence relevant to your motivation for seeking this office and your decision-making if you are elected?
Well, thank you. Declaration of Independence and the Constitution all work basically in my mind as a unit. I mean, this country was founded with the idea and the ideals that we would be free from the overreach of governments. You know, we would be free to choose our religions and free to work and pursue our happiness and such. And that's basically what we need to get back to, and that's getting back to following our founding fathers' visions, and that's basically the way that I would approach my position in Congress, is getting us back to our founding fathers' visions.
Thank you, Mr. Pad. And just for the record, any of the candidates need me to repeat the question, simply ask me, and I will give that to you.
The Declaration of Independence starts out, "We the people." There's a fundamental problem with Washington. They have forgotten that they actually work for the people. And a candidate like me with strong Wyoming values is the type of candidate that's going to go to Washington and fight for Wyoming and take back the people's house. It's time we have true working class citizens, much like the citizen legislators that our founding fathers believed in 240 years ago when they founded this new nation. I believe that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence do truly go hand in hand. And when I was in the Marines, I swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. And many of the 28 principles of liberty can be found throughout the Declaration of Independence. And it's those beliefs in natural law that were the fundamental basis of not only the Declaration of Independence, but the Constitution itself. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Centney. Mr. Stubbsen.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the question. It's a great way to start off our discussion this afternoon, I think, because we'll I'm sure, necessarily talk about a number of our frustrations with the way the federal government handles our daily lives today. But this gets us back to really what's fundamental, which is we live in the greatest country on the face of the earth. And you can trace it back to those foundational documents like the Declaration of Independence, where the very foundation of our country is based in an urge to free ourselves from tyranny, in a determination to have self-determination, individual worth. Those are things that are ironed into our DNA as a country. And as frustrated as we get, and as broken as we know Washington, D.C. is, that is the essence of who we are as a nation. And I think back to those founding fathers like John Hancock and George Washington. These weren't guys that had nothing to lose. These were guys that had built their fortune in a colonial system, and they put it all at risk to make sure that we as a nation could have our own say on who we were going to be and how we would move forward. And that's just, it's something we don't see a lot of today, but I think as I look back to our heritage, it gives me great hope for our future.
Thank you, Mr. Stubbsen. Mr. Christensen.
You know, the Declaration, the Constitution, that whole conversation was really tied for our founding fathers to, are we even going to have a federal government? And the agreement finally took place when they decided to clearly identify the powers, and only those powers. And what we've seen in recent years is through rule and regulation, a vast expansion on that. In the Wyoming legislature, I've been a strong advocate for pushing back against government regulation, about honoring that original intent in those original conversations. I think for us to be successful, we've got to look back at at our founding fathers, at their vision, and understand that's what really set America apart. We seem as a country to have lost some focus on that. My record in the legislature, and as a business person, I understand what those kind of regulations do to you. We've got to be consistent, and we've got to be clear, and we've got to return to those original values and let the states be the states, and the federal government take care of the very little bit of authority that they were originally agreed on.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Mr. Konsmo.
I love this question. It's a great question and a very interesting question. The Declaration of Independence is an optimistic document. It was written for optimism, and we lose our optimism every day in our country, and yet it could be a document that guides us. So as a federal officer, as a federal elected official, as that person, we need to carry that optimism as our thesis. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, a Republican, has said that we can be a party of proposition, meaning that we can put out ideas for the country and lead the country out of a base of optimism. And I think that that's what will guide me. I am the most optimistic person of all time. My students say I am the most optimistic person of all time. And I believe in that optimistic process, that we can have an exchange of ideas, and that's what the Declaration of Independence set forth in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Konsmo. Mr. Rammel.
Declaration of Independence states that we have unalienable rights which come from God. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But it doesn't feel like we have those rights anymore, because every time we turn around, we have to ask the federal government for permission to do anything. In fact, the federal government is controlling the United States, and in particular the West. It's time, I think, for another Declaration of Independence. Wyoming has come to the point where it's time to stand up to the federal government and claim that we do have unalienable rights, and we intend to enforce them and take control of our own destiny in Wyoming. That's what the future is about, and it's going to be a difficult time, but we have to do what What the founders did once, we're going to have to do again.
Thank you, Mr. Rammel. Mr. Smith.
Well, I love the Declaration of Independence because really it tells us where we get our rights from. And our rights come from God, and they're unalienable rights. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'll tell you right now, that is being infringed upon us. If you look at our society, we're being told that government is our source, but we know that we have rights that were given to us by God to be free to achieve our destiny as we see fit in America. That's why over half of the Nobel Prize winners have come from the United States. That's why all these great ideas of the last couple of centuries have come from the United States. And we need to get back to that. And this idea that government is the source, or somehow government can control things, or government can create outcomes, has got to stop. We have got to export Wyoming values to Washington, and that's why I want to be your next congressperson. I'll tell you right now, if you look at what's happening on a lot of fronts, whether it be control of our economy or control of our freedom of speech, we've got to push back, and we've got to educate our children, and we've got to educate them on the same documents that our founding fathers were educated on, and the same writers like Adam Smith, who taught about the free market and how important that was, or Cicero, who taught about the importance of personal liberties, and get back to what the Declaration of Independence really meant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And finally, Mrs. Cheney.
You know, when you look at our founding as a whole, it is miraculous. And among the most miraculous and revolutionary aspects of it is this notion of inalienable rights, that our rights as Americans come from our Creator. They do not come from our government. And there are many nations around the world today who have documents that they call a declaration, or that they call a constitution in particular. But their constitutions, for the most part, are a list of rights the citizens are given. That's not how our system was designed, and that is the beauty and the majesty and the miracle at the heart of our system. And we now have a situation where both, if you look at the Constitution and the balance of power that our founders envisioned, it was a balance of power that left very clear only those enumerated powers to the federal government, and the other power was reserved to the states. That has gotten totally out of whack with the massive overreach of the federal government, and we have to get that back in line. It also had a very clear structure at the center, at the federal level, of a balance of power between the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And today, that's also out of whack. For that balance to work, each of those three branches has to be willing to stand up and defend its power and authority. Today, the President of the United States rides roughshod, and the Congress has abdicated its authority and responsibility. We've got to have a leader in Washington who will be able to stand up and conduct effective oversight, who will be able to take back from unelected bureaucrats and federal agencies those powers that Congress ought to be exercising and that only Congress has the right to exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cheney. The next question, Mr. Centeny. Oh, I'm sorry. We will afford the time for a 30-second rebuttal if anybody wishes to do so. Seeing none, okay. We'll proceed with the next question. Mr. Centeny, in light of the transgender decree put forth by the Obama administration, what power and authority as a congressman would you possess to address issues such as this?
Earlier, it was talked about the balance of power. These executive decrees or imperial orders or whatever you want to call them, they've been referred to various things because this president has proven time and time again that he's nothing more than believes that he's an emperor. We've seen this in various cases, and the transgender bathroom issue was just one of the most recent things. As a member of Congress, you need to stand against that. You need to basically write the right legislation in order to stop this federal overreach and these executive orders. As a member of Congress, we have the right to restructure the executive branch, executive agencies. If they are basically carrying out an executive order that we find unconstitutional, unjust, immoral, unethical, or even illegal, we have the right to basically either abolish that agency or downsize them using the power of the purse until they actually fall within the size, scope, and authority of the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Centeny. Mr. Stubson.
You know, I think this is probably just the most recent and egregious evidence of really a war on common sense by this administration. And, you know, who would have thought a year, 2 years ago that taking the position that men should use men's rooms and women should use women's rooms is a radical notion. And yet that's really what the administration has tried to make it. And I think what's particularly concerning about this is it digs into the heart of what we as Americans believe should be in local control. What we as parents, what we as school boards, what we as schools should be able to decide. And I mean, the issue aside, anytime the federal government comes in and tries to dictate what's happening in my kid's classroom, in my kid's school, they've gone overboard. And they certainly have in this case. And what's particularly interesting about the way the administration phrased this is they said it's just a suggestion. But of course, if you don't follow our suggestion, we're going to take away your federal funds. And that's really the heart of where Congress can fight back on it and say, no, we control the purse strings. We control where those funds go. And really it is Congress's ultimate authority. If they don't give it up, like they have in so many cases over the years, that's where they step in and say, no, local school districts are in charge. The administration is not.
Thank you, Mr. Stubbs. Mr. Christensen.
Well, this letter that came down from Washington, the federal government, you know, it's another example of the federal government being in the business where they do not belong. And we have a very clear example with that letter getting into our state's business and the business of education of our children. It belongs in the states. That is the state's business, and it's best effective when it's an agreement between the state, between their school boards, the teachers, and the parents, the children. And so we need to, this is one of those easy examples to get the federal government out of states' education. The very last letter that we just received that came out, the degree last week, had to do with teaching students in their original languages, their language of origin, the language they speak from their ethnicity. And what another example of how to divide and break up a country instead of calling America a melting pot. Here we have a new letter coming down to our schools that say, well, we've got to teach those kids in the language of their original nation. Let's respect their diversity. Well, I'm one that thinks if you're going to be in America, you need to be an American. It's a melting pot, not a country of division. And so let's bring the education department, bring all those responsibilities back to the states where they belong and where the states can do the best job at it.
Thank you, Mr. Konsmo.
Yeah, as a teacher, I always favor educational choices to be made on the local level. I also do not support executive orders making decisions for our entire country. I always prefer discussion and legislation where many people can exchange ideas. This particular bathroom issue, I believe, is an election year trick by Democrats to take our attention off of bigger issues. And if I can give you a local connection to illustrate that, if we focus on this bathroom issue instead of fixing our state economy, we're not going to have schools to even have bathrooms. And I'll give you one specific example. At my college where I teach, we've already cut our budget this year by $2 million, with more budget cuts on the way this year and certainly more in coming years. The priority is the budget so that we can have many people taking advantage of education in our state, not worrying about labels on bathrooms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rammel.
Thank you. This issue, to me, is a child of the gay rights movement and the progress that they have made in recent years, including same-sex marriage. We're so worried about being politically correct and whose feelings we're going to hurt if we don't support things like this that they become main issues. This thing would never have come up years ago if the country hadn't become so worried about what other people think. I am totally opposed to this issue. I would fight it in Congress. I do not believe it's a federal issue. If anything, it's a state issue. And we've been able to cope with this situation for a long time. It affects a very, very small percentage of people. And for them to threaten us with withholding federal money is entirely wrong. And I would fight this, and I will continue to fight against gay marriage also. I believe that is the This is a cousin to this issue, and it is as wrong as this issue is.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
You know, during the Revolutionary War, the battle cry for the Patriots was no king but King Jesus, because they didn't want a king. And right now, we have a man who's acting like a king from the executive branch. These executive orders have just been nonstop, and they're actually unconstitutional. I mean, on top of the executive branch, you have the fourth branch of government, which I call federal bureaucracy, all these agencies that have run roughshod over us in Wyoming, whether it be in agriculture or the mineral industry, or now the school districts. And on top of that, you have an oligarchy for a Supreme Court. So really the issue is Congress going to take back the power that has been given them? And the answer is we better, while we still can. And so I'll fight for that. I'll tell you, Congress is the people's voice, and Congress has abdicated their role in the federal government. And it'll be Congress, it'll be the head that will need to be reformed, and we have got to fight this. I would support legislation that would actually abolish the Department of Education. The Department of Education has proven that they actually cannot and will not make sound decisions. I mean, the idea of putting 50% of our children at risk is insane, and we need to fight that. And our local school districts could do a much better job with that $76 billion that they get a year, and we could have a much better educational system if we were to use those resources properly.
Thank you. Mrs. Cheney.
There are two sets of issues that are directly relevant here, and one is in the name of furthering a liberal progressive agenda, the Obama administration is putting all of our daughters at risk. And they are able to do it because of the second issue, which is federal funding for education. And it is not just on the transgender bathroom roll that we're seeing this kind of federal blackmail go on, but we're seeing it also in Common Core, where states are told that they'll be punished if they don't adopt the Common Core standards, as an example. Since the Department of Education was established, you can look at the track record of the kids in our schools, and you can look at the track record of their test scores, and at best, they've been stagnant. So the Department of Education, which has sucked up, at this point, hundreds of millions of dollars out of the budget, is doing a fundamental disservice to our kids. When our fifth graders come home from school, as mine did, and tell me that in English class, under Common Core, they read the UN Declaration on Human Rights, and they learn that that is the fundamental document that guarantees our rights as Americans. This isn't just neutral. This isn't just an issue where we can sort of accept it and move on. We've got to fundamentally end federal involvement and the federal government's role in our education system. And we've got to exercise the power of the purse as members of Congress. And it requires being willing to stand up against the teachers' unions. The teachers' unions are incredibly powerful, but we need to make sure that people understand we are on the side of the teachers. We're not on the side of the unions. We believe in teachers. We believe in good teachers. We believe it's the teachers and the parents that ought to have the right and the ability to make the decisions about the education of our kids. We also ought to have charter schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Cheney. And finally, Mr. Pat.
Well, thank you. This is just another example of blackmail or coercion, if you will, from the federal government. They've done it in the past. If you think, if you don't lower your speed limit to 55, we're going to withhold highway funds. If you don't raise your drinking age to 21, if you don't adopt Common Core, we're not going to allow you to even apply for any of the race to the top funds. It comes back to this again. They're threatening funds, withholding of funds. So the question, I believe, was basically, what do you have power? What can you do in Congress? Congress delegates where the funding is to be spent. That's what Congress needs to do. They need to do what I've been talking about is the Title I movement, to bring Congress's power back to Congress and stop allowing these regulatory agencies and the judicial branch and especially the executive branch to usurp the powers away from them and their authorities away from them. So as for what you can do as a member of Congress, it all comes down to the dollar bills. And then here on the state level, the states have to decide whether or not it's really worth having a thumb or basically more like a foot on their throat by accepting some of these practices like Common Core and like this transgender bathroom issue or whatever. I think the states are going to have to start to get together and just and basically say, enough is enough. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pat. Would any candidate wish for a rebuttal? Mr. Rammel?
Most of the people don't most of the people in Wyoming don't know some of the positions that some of the candidates have taken in the past. I'm surprised that Leland is against the transgender issue, because he has voted against the sanctity of marriage, and he's voted a number of times on liberal gay rights issues while a senator in the state of Wyoming, and I would love to hear him rebut me.
Thank you, Mr. Rammel. Anybody else? No, we'll proceed with the next question. Mr. Stubson, please explain your understanding of the constitutional authority that the U.S. House possesses over the Supreme Court. And please give us a specific example of how you would use that.
Well, I'll tell you what authority I don't think the U.S. House of Representatives has, and that is this key power of confirming justices that the Senate has. And of course, we have right now before us a historic situation where we've got really a 4-on-4 judge split, where we have the Senate, and I think appropriately so, asking some really hard questions about who the president has nominated for that position. What I think is important is for the Senate to continue to exercise their confirmation authority in a way that really ensures that we have justices that respect the Constitution, because we know and we've seen over the last few years how important even a single justice can be, and how our rights can rise or fall based upon a decision of one man or one woman up on the Supreme Court bench. And so to me, that's the key congressional power which resides in the Senate, and that's the one that we really need to make sure that they exercise to its full extent.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen.
Having served in the state Senate, I do recognize that there are some opportunities that the U.S. Senate has that the House doesn't. However, the House has great responsibility. It has responsibility with the budgets. It has responsibility to make sure that the budget is spent according to the people's will. It has the responsibility to balance the budget. And if we're doing our job and sending the dollars in the right places, the court, they're able to make their decisions and rule on issues. But what we've seen lately is a court that really has interjected itself. I think this next appointment is going to be critical to the future of our country, but it doesn't diminish the responsibility that the House has, the representatives have in their jobs. We talk about some of this regulation that's been mentioned earlier in the day, and there's a Congressional Review Act. There's an opportunity and a tool to be used against these overwhelming regulations. You know, a minute ago I had some questions about what I've done, and I'll tell you one of the things about having a track record is you vote thousands and thousands of times, and you study the issues and you work on them. And I've done that, and that really separates me from the pack. You're going to hear a lot of people talk about what they would do, but there's only a few of us that have actually ever voted on a law, try to change things, make things better. I am pro-life. I'm pro-marriage between a man and a woman. That's my track record, and I stand on that.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Mr. Consmo.
I think this is a very important issue, very serious issue, and I'd like to switch it around just a little bit. Whenever we look at the Constitution, I look at the Constitution with a very conservative approach. I think that we want to remember that it's about protecting limited government and protecting our civil liberty. And as an elected official, a representative needs to be accountable to the Constitution and explain their decision-making to the constituents. I think that is the idea that I would follow if elected. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rammel.
Would you repeat the question again?
Explain your understanding of the constitutional authority that the U.S. House possesses over the Supreme Court, and please give a specific example of how you would use that.
Well, one of the great powers that Congress has is they can determine the jurisdiction of the courts. And this is something that hasn't been used all that much. Let's use the gay rights issue, for example. The Supreme Court never would have been able to rule on that had the Congress denied them jurisdiction. And I could use example after example after example. It's one of the great powers that Congress has that they don't use, in my opinion, nearly enough. In fact, I can't remember the last time that Congress denied the federal courts jurisdiction over an issue. But this is one thing where we can change and make a big difference in Congress.
Thank you, Mr. Rammel. Mr. Smith.
Congress sets jurisdiction for the courts, and that's a great way that the U.S. House of Representatives can be a part of holding the Supreme Court accountable. And also on the funding of the federal government, that's done by Congress. And so we have a runaway federal government right now with regulatory overreach. We've got the waters of the U.S., we've got the Clean Power Plan that are used by the EPA to really just attack our industries, our coal, our mining, our agriculture. And so we could actually use our power of the purse. And if we have rulings that go against us by the Supreme Court, we can actually go ahead and still defund the EPA, the Department of Interior, the BLM, those who would unconstitutionally usurp their authority in an unelected official way upon the people, because that power is vested in Congress.
Thank you. Mrs. Cheney.
The role of the Supreme Court is to interpret the law, not to make law. And the role of Congress is to make law. So one of the most important things Congress can do, for example, when you have a situation where the Supreme Court rules, as it did, that the EPA has the authority to regulate carbon dioxide as a pollutant, Congress ought to, I believe, on day one of the new Congress in January of 2017, pass a law saying the EPA may not regulate carbon dioxide as a pollutant, and get into a situation where we are preventing the EPA, in that example, from using a tool that is responsible for some of the most dangerous and damaging things it's doing. The other thing that Congress has to do, and members of Congress have to do, is watch very carefully. When you have court decisions like the decision in Roe v. Wade, which I believe should be overturned, which I believe was the wrong decision, you can watch the progressive liberal movement try to take that decision and expand it far, far beyond even the decision itself, which was wrong. And so you see things like funding for Planned Parenthood. And I believe Congress has an absolute responsibility not just to talk about defunding Planned Parenthood, not just to pass legislation to defund Planned Parenthood, but to stand up and say, not only are we going to defund this organization completely, and that doesn't mean that they get money for other things they say they do, but not for abortion. We're going to defund it completely, and we're going to conduct investigations and hearings into their behavior in selling baby parts, and we're going to prosecute them, and we're going to shut them down. Those are the kinds of steps that Congress can take in the face of a Supreme Court that's acting beyond its bounds.
Thank you, Mr. Pad.
I personally believe the Congress has considerable power in matters of decisions made by the Supreme Court that you don't believe in or you don't feel are right, because as was stated, the Supreme Court is supposed to not interpret the laws to their own political agenda, if you will. What Congress can do, if the Supreme Court rules in some arbitrary manner that seems against the intent of the law that they're ruling on, Congress can clarify that. They have the power of legislation. That's what they have, or what they're supposed to have if they would take it back. So they can legislate. They can create laws that clarify decisions and make the decisions make the legislation in such a manner that the Supreme Court would have no alternative but to make the decision go in the way that the law was intended to. I mean, like I say, Congress, they have the ability to legislate up to and including introducing amendments to the Constitution if need be. I mean, they can actually do that. So really, that's where your power lies within Congress, in my opinion, is that they can clarify. You know, if you get a bad decision from a court, you can actually clarify it through the legislative process, make them abide by it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Centney.
With Congress having the power of the purse strings, we can look at the Supreme Court's budget, but also we need to go deeper than that. We can look at the entire federal judicial system, and we need to realize that there is a real sickness going on, and it's judicial activism. We see judges basically making the law, misinterpreting the law for their own agendas, not only on the liberal side, but we've also seen it in some cases on the conservative side, supporting companies like Monsanto and big corporations We also see a problem with things like Citizen United. We do need to, as a member of Congress, basically do some fundamental campaign finance reforms so the judicial system can overturn that ruling on Citizens United and take the big money out of politics. We also have a prime example here in the state Supreme Court level. A couple years ago, there was Senate File 104, which stripped the state superintendent of her rights, basically, and it took away the voter's voice. Now, the state Supreme Court overturned that and found that unconstitutional, and I believe that was on the right track, and that was a great decision. But once again, Congress nationally all have the power of the purse strings and writing new laws in which the judicial system should enforce, and they should be constitutional. Thank you.
Thank you. Any candidate wish for a rebuttal? Mr. Rammel?
Leland, I have your voting record. You have voted for abortion, you have voted for gay rights, and to sit up here and to tell the people of Wyoming that you're pro-life and pro-sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman is not truthful. You not only have casted bad votes, but you're dishonest.
Any other rebuttal? All right, we'll move on to our next question. Mr. Christensen, what specific, and please be specific, things would you do to apply the 10th Amendment when it comes to federal overreach on states and the people?
You know, when it comes to the 10th Amendment, we've got a track record of taking on those kind of issues, of pushing back in the legislature against federal overreach. Right now, Wyoming has right at 25 lawsuits against the federal government. So we've supported those, taken them on, and it's a tough battle. I think the battle now needs to go to Washington, and we do that through working together and building voting blocks, building consensus, and taking on the issues and helping the rest of Congress understand that when Wyoming wins, America wins. We may be the smallest kid on the block, relatively speaking, but the issues in Wyoming really affect America. And whether it's wildlife, whether it is Endangered Species Act, whether it is waters of the U.S., whether it's a clean power plan, those are issues that are going to, in time, affect this country. And I think that opportunity and that experience that I've had, both at a local level in county, serving as county commissioner, at the state level, serving as a state legislator, has given me a unique set of skills. And then it goes back to small business and ag and the lessons I learned back on the farm and in the ranch. That's what it takes to make a difference. That's what it takes to win in Washington, is a proven track record and a confidence that you know how to do it the day you show up, and that history and the respect.
Thank you, Mr. Consmo.
Anytime we look at the Constitution, we have to interpret it in a conservative way. This is especially important when we only have one representative in our state speaking for the state. As we look at issues like Obamacare or environmental regulations or the Waters of the U.S. Act, these bathroom laws, Common Core, all these decisions that are being made and implemented on the federal level, there's always a battle between what the state would want and what the federal offices would want. We need to be more assertive with our voice, with our state voice, and always battle back against that federal control. As a representative, that would be my overwhelming desire, to represent our state's rights in a way that puts our local decision-making above a federal decision-making process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rammel.
The 10th Amendment will ultimately save the United States. It is the protection that the Constitution allows when the federal government gets out of hand. The states will have to start nullifying some federal legislation and unconstitutional acts. That's the difference. We have to have leadership in the state of Wyoming and throughout the rest of the United States to start standing up to some of these things. When the federal government starts ruling, the Supreme Court in particular starts ruling in places it has no authority, the only thing left is for the states to stand up and claim that they have 10th Amendment rights over those issues. This is the way that the United States will be saved, but we have to have new leadership in Wyoming And frankly, we have to have new leadership throughout the country. I am a proud 10th Amendment supporter. I have been all my life. I've written a book on the subject, and I am a strong supporter of state nullification. This is the way I think we must go.
Mr. Smith.
The key to restoring our economy and even restoring our freedoms is absolutely the 10th Amendment. We have to use it strongly. If you look at, I mean, really, it's how do we select our representatives? And it has to be people who understand that the proper role of a politician, the proper role of a congressman is somebody who understands it's limited government. Limited government is always the answer. Government doesn't create jobs. In fact, government takes jobs. When you create a government job, you basically have taken several private sector jobs out of the market. So we need somebody who understands that role. It's people like you who get up early every single day, 5, 6 days a week, 5 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night, that build and create things for our economy. And that's the kind of people that we need to free you up. We need to reduce regulation, and we do that through the 10th Amendment. We have to understand the proper role. We have to pull back all these regulations, and certainly we need to use the 10th Amendment also for what's happened in this federal overreach on our social issues in terms of bringing allowing men into our children's bathrooms. What was really kind of scary is the fact that Maine and Wisconsin joined the lawsuit of the states against the federal government, but guess who didn't? Wyoming didn't. What kind of leaders are we electing that Wyoming did not join that lawsuit as a 10th Amendment issue to protect our children?
Thank you. Mrs. Cheney.
Yeah, the 10th Amendment is fundamental, and I agree Wyoming should have joined the lawsuit. The Clean Power Plan also violates fundamentally our 10th Amendment rights. And it isn't just a discussion about sort of constitutional theory. And we've got to have a representative who will be able to educate and explain to people that it's not just theoretical. But when the federal government is doing what it is doing today, which is being involved in so many areas it has no business being involved in, whether it's transgender bathrooms, our kids' education, Obamacare, it's doing so many things and is dedicating resources we don't have to those things, that it is simultaneously unable to do the things we need it to do. We need our federal government to defend the nation, and we need our federal government to secure our borders. And it's failing to do both of those things now, partly because we've got the worst president in American history, but also because it has so fundamentally violated the balance of power between the federal government and the states, because every single day it's violating states' rights. The pendulum has swung so far in the direction of centralized federal control, and you see it in nearly every policy of this administration, whether you're talking about Dodd-Frank, the attack on our community banks, whether you're talking about the attack on our farmers and ranchers. Across the board, there is an attack on how people in communities and towns all across our state live their lives. And that's got to end, and we have to make sure that we elect people who are willing to stand up and fight that fight, no matter the incoming, no matter the attack that comes, because that is what the Constitution prescribes, and that is the genius of the founding.
Thank you, Mr. Pat.
It was mentioned earlier on another question about when we're talking about constitutions and such of other countries, where it was mentioned that other countries have constitutions that are the documents they call constitutions, where they were just basically a list of rights that were given to the people by the government. Well, our founders did exactly the opposite. They gave a list of rights, if you will, authority to the government, and reserved all the rest for the rest of us and for the states. And this goes back to the core issue that I keep harping on, I guess, and you'll probably hear it some more tonight, is that Congress, it all starts with Congress taking back its authority. They cannot allow the continued overreach of these regulatory agencies and the executive branch. You know, that's what you can do at the federal level. On a state level, states are going to have to stand up and basically say, you know, ask themselves, if you will, is it really worth a few extra dollars to have the foot of the government on your throat, or fight back and say, you know, we're not going to do this. We have this right, and basically that's where we're at. It is. It comes back to the powers of the federal government are intended to be limited. and that's where, if you're in Congress, that's where you have to fight, is to go back to abiding by the Constitution and taking back the powers that's granted to the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Centney.
Basically, the 10th Amendment of the Constitution is probably one of the most important in the Bill of Rights. When our founding fathers thought about this nation and thought about the Constitution, there were some arguments. And I believe that what was created is basically a perfect document. I believe Washington's basically forgotten who they work for. And you're going to hear this a lot with a lot of answers, because the answer is the power of the purse strings. You're going to need a member of Congress that's ready to hit the ground running on day one. Somebody who's willing to fight the fight for the people of this great state, and somebody who's willing to stand up for the Constitution, and somebody that's proven in the past that they're willing to stand up for the Constitution. But we do need a fighter in Washington. Now, I understand forming coalitions and building teams, that is important, but we're going to need somebody with a broadcast journalism background, somebody who's going to stand up, somebody who's going to understand how the media works and how to get your issues, Wyoming issues, out there. We can use the power of the purse strings as a member of Congress to stop a lot of this freedom infringing regulations. We can restructure the executive branch, and that's actually approved under the necessary and proper clause. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stubbson.
You know, the question does sort of harken back to the foundations of the nation, and really the beauty of the federal system, which recognizes that, you know, states are going to be different. We're going to have those specific powers in the federal government, but states are going to be able to solve situations that make sense in a way that makes sense for them. And, you know, we have a desert state. We're going to treat water differently than a Florida. We have 583,000 people. We're going to have different problems and different solutions than heavily populated states. But we have a federal government that has really skewed the band a little bit away from that initial approach. And that's why I think it's so important to elect somebody that's actually seen this on the front line from the state level, that's got a demonstrated record of understanding that states can solve problems, that states do solve problems, that understands all the little tools and tricks of the trade that the federal government uses to do this, whether it be unfunded mandates or whether it be funding with multiple strings attached. That's the kind of person that you need in Congress, that recognizes exactly how Congress has hamstringed the states, particularly Wyoming. That's how you get somebody that's going to be able to unwind that a little bit and recognize that balance that our founding fathers recognized and that was so wise from the beginning.
Thank you, Mr. Stubbson. Anybody wish for a rebuttal? Seeing none, it is 8 o'clock. We're going to step aside and take a 10-minute break, and we'll be back here shortly. You're listening to the Goshen County Republican Party's United States House of Representatives Candidate Forum here at Eastern Wyoming College in Torrington. We'll be back to the campus in approximately 10 minutes. All right, we're back here at Eastern Wyoming College for the second half of tonight's U.S. House Candidate Forum. The next candidate in the line of questioning will be Mike Consmo. Mr. Consmo, your question. Who granted the Environmental Protection Agency its authority, and what legitimate authority does it possess?
It's a very fascinating question and a good question, and I'm going to do a little bit of a politician answer for this. We just took our break, and I'd like to maybe push our debate towards a different subject. As a teacher and as an educator, I think our priority in this election is the economy and our state economy. And I understand that the line of questioning is bringing up quite a few federal issues, and I appreciate that. But I think we need to talk more about how we can fix our coal industry with a positive message. And I think we could talk more, excuse me, about how we can prepare our natural gas industry to succeed, and how we can put into place some strategies on an international level to boost our oil prices, or how we can boost new industries in our state like tourism and outdoor recreation. Our energy can change the world, and I think that this needs to be the focus of this debate tonight and of this election. And with great respect to the question, I prefer that we focus on our state economy in the second half of the debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rammel.
The EPA, one of my favorite subjects. As I recall, the EPA was created in the early 70s, but not by Congress. It's a regulatory agency that seems to have unlimited power. They do what they want, and we've had a hard time reining them in. That's why I believe that the EPA should be abolished through a congressional act, and I think that it can be done. I think that we can make the argument that the states have their own DEQs, Department of Environmental Quality, and that we simply do not need the EPA. This is a big issue for the next congressman from Wyoming because the EPA is causing the state of Wyoming a lot of trouble. In fact, they're largely responsible for trying to bury the coal industry up in the Powder River Basin. So this is something that I would be extremely dedicated to do to stopping the EPA. I think it's something that has to be done if we want to have a future in Wyoming.
Mr. Smith.
The EPA, I believe, was created by the Clean Air Act and back in the 70s, and it was designed to actually restrict pollutants, which we needed because we had a lot of pollution in our streams and our air. We had acid rain. We had all kinds of needs to regulate pollutants through interstate means, and so that was why the EPA was created, and it did a great job through the Clean Air Act, and now we have rivers and streams that are wildly clean. We have a coal industry that technology has gone crazy for them, and we actually beat all the standards of the EPA or of the Clean Air Act significantly. But what's happened is that this constitutional authority that they have, they've overstepped that, and now we have an EPA through unelected officials who are increasing their standards through a clean power plan and the waters of the U.S. And we have an EPA that is acting completely unconstitutional, and they're actually attacking U.S. citizens. You have a man named Andy Johnson over there in Lyman, Wyoming, and he simply dug a little pond, no further across than this table, and no deeper than my chest, and he had $60 million in fines facing him, but he stood up to the EPA and he won. But my question is, what happens to the EPA? What happened to the unelected officials who violated the Constitution and went after Andy Johnson for their worldview ideas of global warming or whatever? What happened to them? Nothing. Nothing. We need to hold them accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cheney?
When the EPA was created in the 1970s, there weren't any state DEQs. And today, 85% of our environmental regulation, according to the EPA itself, is done at the state level, and that's where it should be done. The EPA today, because it's in this alliance with radical environmentalists, and actually in the pocket of radical environmentalists funded by people like George Soros, organized nationally, so that they are operating in a way, it's not just Andy Johnson, it's, when they can show up at David Hamilton's door in Worland, Wyoming, and tell him he owes him $70 million because he moved an irrigation ditch. And they do that not because they think anybody's actually going to pay, but because if a government agency shows up and says it's going to ruin you, then it's blackmail. And basically they're trying to get individuals all across our state and all across this country to agree to give the EPA rights it fundamentally doesn't have. When the EPA can't get something done through executive order or through Congress, they get their radical environmentalist friends to sue the government, and then they settle. And they say, you know what, we had to settle that lawsuit. And then, to make matters even worse, we've got the Equal Access to Justice legislation, which means that you and I pay for those lawsuits. So those are all areas where we've got to fundamentally, the EPA needs to be abolished, and we need to begin immediately repealing the legislation, repealing the regulations that they've put in place that are unconstitutional. They're doing great harm, not just here in Wyoming, but to our freedoms all across the country.
Thank you. Mr. Pad?
Well, thank you. I hate to get specific because sometimes I miss, but I think it was President Nixon that signed that in. But the 70s gave us the three nasty E's: the EPA, which is, as I consider it, the Employment Prevention Agency, and also the Department of Energy and Department of Education, all in that same decade. Who gave them their authority? They gained their authority basically with the help of the entire Department of Interior. They basically usurped their authority Congress gave them their authority, is what it boils down to. They gave them their authority by inaction, by just not keeping their authority. They just allowed them to take it on their own. Nobody actually gave it. They took it, and nobody stepped up to stop it. EPA doesn't have the authority that they seem to think they have, and that's something that Congress has to do. They need to reel them back in. And as Liz has said, when this first came about, there wasn't a bunch of DEQs across the country that were able to do this. So their time, their usefulness has basically reached its end, and we need to really get rid of them completely. At the very, very least, reel them back into an advisory agency rather than a regulatory agency that's creating their own regulations. And when they create regulations that have punitive consequences, that's legislating, and they don't have that authority. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Centeny.
The EPA was created exactly in 1970. It was an idea by Richard Milhouse Nixon. He basically put forth the idea to Congress, and they went ahead and initiated it under the necessary and proper clause where they can create federal agencies. At the time, we did need a foundation for regulations on bad air. Many people can remember the smog in places like Los Angeles and Houston. The Great Lakes were dying. There were rivers catching fire across the Midwest. We did need those regulations in place. Currently, all 50 states, plus our U.S. territories, have EPAs, or Departments of Environmental Quality, and many of those are more stringent than the EPA itself. So what I am proposing, if elected, I will work using the power of the purse strings to basically downsize the EPA by 75%, take away the regulatory authority, turn them strictly into an advisory agency to the states, such as if we have an air haze drift problem with Nebraska, they come in and they mediate between the two states. But other than that, we do away with the regulatory authority, and by downsizing them, they will no longer basically be too big for their britches.
Thank you, Mr. Stubson.
It's interesting that over the last few years, the profound impact we've seen EPA have on our state. And I've chaired our Select Committee on Federal Natural Resource Management at the legislative level. And I just wanted to share a little bit of a story with you about our interaction with EPA. We knew that EPA was doing these sue and settle type of situations where they would enter into these agreements with environmental groups without states, without industry, without anybody having any say or even knowing what's happening. So we said, come talk to us about it. And they sent us a letter and said, no, we don't do that. We don't talk to the states about that. And so we sent them a list of questions and said, well, tell us, explain why you're doing this. Why aren't we being included? It's been 3 years. We don't have a response back to those written questions. So we actually decided we were going to subpoena them. If they're going to have profound impacts in this state, we should be able to talk to them. And yet we find out all the decision makers are not a single one in the state of Wyoming. They're all in Denver. And it's really the frustration with that, with the EPA, that has launched me into this race, because I know you have to have the power of the purse. You have to have the constitutional powers of Congress to make a difference. And if you look, we have a plan, Winning Back the West, that sets out a strategy for doing that on all these issues, regional haze, clean power plan, whatever, you name it. And if you go to our website, you'll see that we actually have a strategy for dealing with them.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen.
The EPA has outlived their usefulness. The states' DEQs have stepped up. They know the land, they know the issues. They have a lot more at stake. But you see the EPA being used by special interest groups through the equal access of justice to fund their own projects, to keep themselves alive and actually fairly profitable. And so the EPA needs to be reined in. You do that with the budget, you do that with the purse. And through approving a budget that hasn't happened since this administration took over, that's how we get control of the EPA, when we back them off and bring that responsibility clearly back to the states. Those are the people. Wyoming has done a great job taking care of their land and their water and their air. The Andy Johnson issue, it's a horrifying nightmare on how the EPA came in after a Wyoming man in Fort Bridger, had met all the conditions of the state, of the DEQ, of the engineer's office, and started making threats, and at one time had him facing $16 million in fines. I spent some time with Andy. I went down, walked his property, spent several hours with him. It is quite a pond. It's, according to the government measurement, 600 feet long. It's about 70 yards wide, and at its deepest, 18 feet deep. It's a significant pond, but Andy Johnson went through the steps And it was only with some great volunteers that they were able to fight them back, and once challenged, the EPA completely backed out of it. An organization like that needs to have their wings clipped. They need to have their funding stripped, and this goes back to the states.
Thank you. Rebuttal? Mr. Konsmo.
I'd like to just add one more thing that the other folks haven't really brought up. The EPA is just one environmental problem that we have. We need to be more forward-thinking, and we need to have more of a conservative voice on environmental issues. For instance, we need to be more proactive with water policy for the Colorado River, with water rights for farmers and ranchers. We need to be more proactive on diseases like brucellosis, chronic wasting disease. We need to be more proactive on feeding programs and feedlots. And we need to be more proactive on delisting wolves and grizzly bears in our state. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rammel, your question next. How will you be accessible to the people of Wyoming, and will you place their interests above that of lobbyists?
Number one, I believe that if you're really interested in Wyoming, you probably ought to live here. Know something about Wyoming. I grew up on the Idaho-Wyoming line, spent my whole life with Western States issues, and I am the public lands candidate of this race, I believe. I come from a long line of farmers and ranchers and miners, and I've made public land issues my life. I'm a veterinarian. I work with ranchers and farmers on a regular basis. They're my friends. And just because I go back to Washington, D.C. does not mean that I will stay back there and forget who they are. In fact, it would be a sacrifice for me to go back to D.C. because I like the West. I like to hunt, I like to fish, I like the people out here, and I believe that I will be their greatest advocate. I will do everything in my power to solve the problems that face the people of Wyoming.
Mr. Smith.
The only people that I will answer to when I go back to Washington, D.C. are citizens of the state of Wyoming. See, that's the key. People have to recognize who they represent. And what's happened is people go back to Washington, they become part of the good old boy club, and they're like, hey, you know what? You're not going to get on this committee, or we're not going to feed you this, or hey, we're going to cut your staff if you don't do things our way. But you know what? I'm going to answer to the people of Wyoming, and it really doesn't matter. I ride for the brand. It doesn't matter if they ostracize me. We're going to find a coalition of like-minded folks. We're going to go back there. We're going to listen to the will of the people of Wyoming. And you know what? The will of the people, we are tired of being overregulated. We're tired of not having our rights to live our lives as we see fit. We're tired of the persecution of our agriculture community as well as our mining and oil and gas industry. And we're going to fight back, and I'm going to represent you. And I've heard you loud and clear. And we're not going to give up, put up, or shut up until God takes us up on this issue.
Thank you. Ms. Cheney?
You know, I think that the opportunity to represent the people of Wyoming in Washington reflects really a sacred honor and a sacred trust. We only have one voice in Washington. I think it's got to be the strongest voice possible. And I think the obligation is not just to say, I'm going to fight every single day for Wyoming issues, which I'll do, but to make sure that I'm accessible, to make sure that I'm back home, that I'm here face to face so that we can continue to talk about the issues that matter to people all across this state. I'm the only candidate in this race who's not taking a single dollar of PAC money, because I feel very strongly that it's important that every single citizen in Wyoming know and can see the individuals that are contributing to each one of us. It's not about special interests. It's absolutely about making sure that the people of Wyoming have a voice, and about recognizing that the role and responsibility of Wyoming's representative is got to be to make sure we can build national coalitions so that we can bring national attention and focus to these issues. I've raised more money in Wyoming than anybody else on this stage by orders of 3 to 4. Now, I've been criticized because I've also raised money outside Wyoming. But the fact that individuals around this country have contributed money to me tells you that I will be able to get a national attention and focus for our issues so that we can build the kind of coalitions we have to build. If we want to save the Wyoming coal industry, we can't do it alone. We can't do it just as Wyoming. We've got to do it as a leader for the entire nation in terms of what it's going to take, and explain to people why these issues matter to them. And that's what I'll do every day, and that's my solemn pledge to you.
Thank you, Mr. Pad.
Would you repeat it, because I think I'm kind of misunderstood what
Certainly.
this answers.
Certainly. How will you be accessible to the people of Wyoming, and will you place their interests above that of lobbyists?
Okay. First of all, as far as being accessible, absolutely a necessity, especially in the state of Wyoming. If you pick up one of my flyers, as a matter of fact, you'll see my cell phone number is in there. It's a phone that's laying on the table here right now. I maintain email addresses, and of course in Congress you would have to have a staff to help you sort through the mass quantity of communication that you would have. But I would certainly always remain accessible. I'm not going back there to play follow the leader. I'm going back there to do the best I can and work for the people of Wyoming, not for the people of every other part of the country. Although we do need to work as a country as a whole. My focus would certainly be on the people of Wyoming. So I guess how I would be accessible, communication. I would certainly answer as many personally as I possibly could. And just as a footnote, if you will, for 17 plus years, I've been one of the people that I've fought at the city, the county, and the local levels, and I've stood up and fought next to my neighbors and with my neighbors, and basically I'm not just someone that's just come out of the shadows here during an election season. I've been doing this month after month, year after year, not because I was elected to do so or my job, but because it was the right thing to do, and that's what we do in Wyoming. We stand up in support of our neighbors. It's the Wyoming way. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Centney.
Remaining accessible to people isn't just staying in Washington the entire time. It's coming back on the weekends, attending community events, reaching out to people here in the community. The same cell phone number that I have on my brochure or on my business card is the same cell phone that I'm going to have when I'm in Washington and when I'm traveling the state here meeting with people just like you. Now, what sets me apart from the rest of these people is I'm currently funding the 95% of my own campaign. The rest of the money came from family and friends. I'm doing that on a middle-class income. So there's been people that have asked, well, why don't you have more signs out? Well, it's an affordability issue. I'm working overtime to fund my campaign. And working for the State Department of Corrections, there's actually a lot of overtime right at the moment because we're short-handed. I've been studying the Constitution for over 20 years. I've been studying politics for over 20 years. And I'll tell you what experience I don't have. I don't have experience as being a Washington insider. I don't even have experience as being a Cheyenne insider. But what sets me apart from everybody else is I'm not going to owe anyone any favors except for you, the voters, the people who live right here in Wyoming, the people I plan on fighting for.
Thank you, Mr. Stubson.
The great thing about Wyoming that we all know is that we expect and we demand responsiveness from our elected officials. We all know how we call our governors and senators and congresspeople by their first name. And that's because we demand that we have that right. And we demand that we look them in the eyes and talk to them and see them on a regular basis. And of course, I've seen that in representing my constituents in the legislature as well. But I think fundraising is an important issue to look at. And you look at, we've been working hard, really hard fundraising, and the vast majority of our fundraising has come from inside the state, our friends, our neighbors, our family, our colleagues, the people that know and trust us. And I think it's a legitimate question to say, if you raise 2/3 of your funding from outside the state, who do you serve? You dance with the one that brung you. And certainly if I'm able to make it through the primary, it's because of the people of Wyoming and their support. And you can talk about not accepting money from PACs, but when you have multiple fundraisers sponsored by lobbyists, when you're already having events at the Capitol Hill Club and you're not even a member of Congress, you have to ask some questions about that. Our campaign is Wyoming-based because we know that's who we have to rely upon to get us to Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen.
A great question on how do you remain accessible to the people of Wyoming. Well, as a small businessman, I learned you better listen to your customers. As a Wyoming lawman, I learned you better listen if you're going to get the issue taken care of and help the public. And that's where I really came to appreciate the word public service, and it's public service. That's who you're working for. As a county commissioner, I took that and I listened. If you're going to do the people's work, you need to listen to what the issues are, and most of the time the people will tell you what the answer is. As a state senator, I listened, and I'll give you an example of that. The ag industry, when they came forward and they talked about the trespasses that were happening on their land with people roaming across their property, going into their barns, into their fields, leaving gates open, looking for possible issues to charge them with. We acted on that and we fought back and we protected our ag people with the trespass to collect data bill. Put a real stop on it, and our ag producers appreciated that. You know, as a congressman, I'll listen. You'll return home to the state and do just what I've done the last 30 years in public service, and that's you go to the people, you talk to them, you listen to them, and you make sure you understand what the issue is before you try to solve the problem. A lot of people are going to talk about what they're going to do, and they're going to make promises on how they're going to be accessible to the citizens of Wyoming. My question is, what have they done in the past to be responsive and accessible to the citizens, and that tells you what they'll do in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Consmo.
I think we have a few themes going on here. The first is, how do we be accessible? I've promised to hold office hours in Washington, D.C. and Wyoming to meet with constituents 365 days a year. I've also promised to hold weekly conference calls with all Republican county chairs on a weekly basis, and I will extend that offer to other parties as appropriate. On a lobbying level, I'm a person who does not care about money, and so I will not take money. I have offered to donate 20% of my salary to charities, namely the community colleges and university in our state. I will not conduct any fundraising during the first year I hold office, if elected. I will not accept any gifts of any kind. Those will also be donated to our community colleges and our university. And next week, I'm putting my pickup truck up for sale, because I really believe that my students need an extra boost in life, and I'm willing to commit my life and my financial stability toward that goal. We need to help our students. We need to help our state economy, and there are many others in many other industries who need our help. I will remain accessible, and I will not take money from lobbyists. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there a rebuttal? Okay. Mr. Smith?
I would just like to be clear that I have taken no money from PACs, and most of the money that I have received has come from family and friends. And Liz, I find it offensive that you brag that as a DC bureaucrat married to a DC attorney, that you brag about raising more money than the rest of us, and most of that money came from that particular system.
Ms. Cheney?
You know, it's interesting. Tim is focused on fundraising, but the voters of the state ought to know that while Representative Stubson has been representing his constituents in Cheyenne, he's been paid directly, by big out-of-state corporations who have interests in front of the state legislature. That is the kind of activity that would absolutely be prohibited in Washington. It's unethical, and if you want to know how somebody's going to behave in Washington, I agree, we need to look at the records here in Wyoming.
Okay. Mr. Stubson, I believe Mr. Rammel was, but you're going to allow him next. Okay, thank you, Mr. Stubson.
Yeah, if we're going to talk unethical behavior, let's talk facts. And the fact is, I have a law practice where I represent businesses all across the state, in-state and out-of-state. For example, oil and gas companies that have interests in the state. That's not unethical. That's called making a living. And frankly, that's the way it should be. We have a citizen legislature in the state of Wyoming where when we're done, we go home and we go back to our jobs, we go back to our families, go back to taking the garbage out, we go back to taking the kids. That's actually a system that works. A system that ensures that we're accountable to the people we represent.
Thank you. Mr. Rammel.
Liz Cheney has been so interested in Wyoming issues and Wyoming people, that after she left as a child, she hasn't returned to live in Wyoming for 30+ years. 30+ years she's been absent from Wyoming. And to say that she is not beholding to the people that are funding 2/3 of her campaign that are outside of the state of Wyoming? Liz, you must think the people of Wyoming are absolutely stupid. We know that you are going to be beholden to those people because they have bought you.
Just a second, Ms. Cheney. Per the rules, we just allow one rebuttal.
Well, I've been attacked directly, so I would like to comment. Do you want me to do it my next question?
That'd be fine, yes. We're going to move on to the next question. That will be to Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, what federal agencies would you work to eliminate and why?
Well, I've already stated the Department of Education because they've gone completely mad and they're trying to tell us that truth does not exist, that gender does not exist, and they're trying to somehow make a petri dish, a social experiment, a liberal social experiment out of our schools, and we have to stop it. We have to abolish the Department of Education. They've lost all authority, all moral authority they might have had. Further, the IRS, we need to find a new system. Once Lois Lerner used the IRS as a political weapon, it lost its authority to be able to fairly take taxes. So we've got to fix the IRS. We've got to go to a new system. The next president will determine that. Flat tax sounds good to me. Also, the Department of Energy. I am still trying to figure out what the Department of Energy has done for the United States. It was formed in the 70s, and we've had more energy problems because of the Department of Energy's rulings than you can shake a stick at. So those are the three right now that come to the top of my mind that we would need to get rid of. And it really comes back to what you have to have. You have to have a congressman that understands the proper role of government, and it's limited. And they have to have a proper understanding of the 10th Amendment and the rights that are given the state. And I understand that, and I'm the person that you need to send back to Washington. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Cheney, you're next.
Can you repeat the question?
The question was what federal agencies would you work to eliminate and why?
Yeah, well, I think clearly the Department of Education, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, the IRS, the list is extensive. And again, it needs to get back to getting the government into a constitutional role. And I do think it's important as voters are listening to people on the stage tonight, and people talk about their record in particular. When election time rolls around, everybody says, for example, they're against Common Core. Well, Tim had the opportunity in the state legislature to stop Common Core, and he voted against that. And Tim also, who's now claiming to have the best interests of the people of Wyoming at heart, sponsored SF 104, which stripped the rights of the people of Wyoming to vote for the superintendent of public instruction. So what we've got to think about as you're thinking about who's going to represent us in Washington is who is going to be the strongest, most effective voice possible. I'm a fourth-generation Wyomingite. I will take second place to nobody in terms of people claiming that this isn't my home, that I don't love this place. It's absolutely wrong on both sides of my family. And my husband and I are proud to be raising the fifth generation right here. And it is those Wyoming values that have made this state great that I know we have to fight to defend. It's why I'm in the race. Time is not on our side. And frankly, we cannot send somebody to Washington who's going to have to spend time finding the men's room. We've got to send somebody who's going to be able to hit the ground running on day one to begin to roll back the massive expansion of the federal government that we've seen. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pad.
Oh, sorry, I should have been up here. I wasn't paying attention. I was the very first one on this stage, this group of candidates that said that asked the question in a forum earlier this year, a little while back, and I asked anybody in the room to raise their hand and find out if anyone knew anything that the Department of Energy had done that was beneficial. One person raised their hand, and I said, "Well, what was it?" And he said, "Well, I just wanted to let you know that I knew what it was." You know, most every. But so yes, Department of Energy is the very first one that I would target to getting rid of. You know, and as I said before, the three main E's there: the Department of Energy, Department of Education, and of course the Employment Prevention Agency. Those are the three that I would work my tail off to try to get rid of. At the very least, rein in the EPA to a point to where it was just an advisory board or something like that, rather than a regulatory board. But you know, I've been working on these issues like this at the state and county and city level, and trying to do things to protect our liberties and our freedoms that are the values of Wyoming people for 17 plus years. And you know, not, as I said before, not because I was elected to, not because it was a job, but because it was the right thing to do. So when Leland asked, you know, look at what someone's done, I'd ask, maybe ask the rest of candidates how many city council, town council, or county commissioner meetings that they have actually attended in the last 5 years or since they've been in the state. Thank you.
Mr. Sentney.
Well, there's only one agency that I'd actually totally abolish, and that's the IRS. With the IRS, with my tax plan, the national sales tax, doing away with federal income tax, we can get rid of the IRS, and the monies collected from that national sales tax will actually go to the Wyoming Department of Revenue or that state's respective Department of Revenue. It'll be collected by them. Basically, consider it trickle-up economics. The state will get what they need out of it. The federal government can no longer hold us hostage with our own money, and then we'll give the federal government what we're done with. Now, pertaining to some of these other departments, I've heard people talk about abolishing the Department of Education or the Department of Energy. What my plan does is actually downsizes the EPA, changes it from a regulatory to an advisory agency, downsizes the BLM, takes away their law enforcement authority. Now, when talking about the Department of Education, yes, I believe in downsizing it, but we can't get rid of that agency because they deal with college and university accreditation. And frankly, I don't want somebody going to some fly-by-night medical school doing my operation. We do need that department. And the Department of Energy actually deals with our nuclear arsenal. They're in charge of some things like BWXT Pantex down in Texas that assembles and disassembles nuclear weapons. So I think that's kind of an important one. They just need a smaller role. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stubson.
Thank you. You know, it is great to be attacked on your record because it shows you have one. It shows you've been in the battle. It shows that you've been working and fighting for the people of Wyoming. And that's certainly what I've been doing for the last 9 years. And we talk about Common Core. It's interesting. We should, if you have opposition research, it should actually look at the whole record because the bill that I voted against was one that imposes a standard on local districts. It took the control out of local districts and said you can't even consider Common Core. Now, we've heard arguments for local control, and yet apparently it's only local control if you agree with it. And that's not my philosophy. My philosophy is we let the districts, we let the teachers, we let the people in our towns across Wyoming decide how they're going to teach our kids and what they're going to teach our kids. You'll also see in my record that I fought hard on the science standards to ensure that parents were more involved, to ensure that school districts had more say before those science standards were imposed. You'll see that I voted for legislation to ensure that because Common Core came in a way that didn't make sense, it didn't include everybody at the table, that we had a process moving forward and a system moving forward that made sure that that never happened again, and that parents continued to be the final word in education in Wyoming.
Thank you. Mr. Christensen.
You know, when I look back at this, and whether we talk about the 10th Amendment or whether we just talk about practical experience and see what has happened in Wyoming as a county commissioner, a legislator, a small businessman, I think the Department of Education is on the wrong track, and I think our states have that skill and that ability, and they're the ones that need to take this over, and there's a place that we can save some money. When I look at the EPA and their record and what they have done, it seems to be about self-funding and growing their own kingdom. Our state's DEQ is doing a great job, and I believe that's probably the case in other states around the nation. And then at great personal risk, I'd like to address the IRS, and let me explain why. With the IRS, you know, we look at an incredible corporate tax rate that's chasing dollars out of America. We look at less than half the people actually paying taxes. Whether it's a fair tax, a flat tax, I think the answer is yes, we've got to change that. That's an organization that really seems to just further its own causes. 2 years ago, I was publicly critical of the EPA in a way that clearly upset someone. We were talking about the Indian reservation and the expansion and the EPA's wanting to have more control of 50-mile boundary. It went viral. There were international articles written on it. That was 2 years ago. This year I got notice that I was getting audited for 2014. So I urge you to be cautious, but don't be a coward.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Mr. Consmo.
Thank you. I believe a representative goes to Washington to work through legislation. And I will be a conservative voice that represents our state's interests. I think that we need to work on specific issues through legislation. For example, we need to repeal Obamacare so that we can create more competition and bring prices down. We need to work within the IRS to reduce taxes for small businesses. We need to reduce the powers of the EPA and the BLM. We need to repeal the Waters of the U.S. law. We need to write legislation to delist wolves. And we need to protect Second Amendment rights. And finally, as an educator, I understand that we need to work with local school boards and teachers and parents to reestablish control of our education of our children on the local level. I believe working through legislation is much more powerful than seeking to abolish agencies. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Remmel.
10 years ago, I was considering a run for the United States Senate. And as I looked at all of the issues, I wondered just how could we save this country? I knew the Constitution was in serious trouble, and I knew that Washington, D.C. had basically reached a gridlock. I concluded that the best way to do this was to oppose the federal lands, the ownership of the federal lands in the West. And so I campaigned on the federal land transfer idea that all of the federal public land that they claim they own be transferred back to the states. I have been a champion of this issue now for a decade and a key player in the movement that has now become a multi-Western state movement. If we could do this, we will eliminate several departments and agencies. Number one, if the states controlled the ground, we don't need the Department of the Interior. The agencies that would be removed would be the BLM, the Forest Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Park Service, the EPA. In addition to that, there are other agencies that we can, and departments that we can eliminate. I support the elimination of the Department of Education, Commerce and Energy, IRS. There's a lot we can do, but it's going to take a real strong congressman to start this fight.
Thank you, Mr. Remmel. Rebuttal? If none, Ms. Cheney, you're next. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Remmel will rebut.
Liz and Tim and Leland are all battling it out over Common Core. And it is a fact that both Tim and Leland have supported Common Core, which is a federal program. I've listened to them talk for months about how they support local control, but Common Core is not a program that originated locally. And Liz, she continues to rail on Common Core, but I wonder if the parent of Common Core, which was No Child Left Behind, that her father helped institute, I wonder if she was opposed to that at the time.
Thank you, Mr. Remmel. Would you wish to rebut, Ms. Cheney? Okay. I believe this will be our final question for the evening before we enter our closing remarks. Ms. Cheney, how do you feel about the current pay system for congressmen, their benefits, and lifetime retirement, along with elected officials serving in Washington, D.C., and how would you work to change them?
Yeah, I think it's one of the real symptoms of what's wrong in Washington. I think that when Congress is in a position where they're voting themselves raises, when we see people who are hurting all across the country, there's something fundamentally wrong. When Congress is in a position where they're earning pensions and at the same time drawing on the retirement programs that exist for the rest of us, something's fundamentally wrong, and I think it's got to stop. I also think that people have to recognize when you see things like we've seen with the current U.S. Senate, and this is Republicans and Democrats alike, who decided that they would file a false affidavit with the Department of Health and Human Services to claim that they have fewer than 50 employees. And they did that so that they wouldn't have to live under Obamacare. Now that's fundamentally un-American and wrong and fraudulent. And when you've got a system where our lawmakers are passing laws that the rest of us have to live under, and then they file a document that essentially is making a false claim so they themselves don't have to live under it, it's easy to see why people are frustrated and why there's so much wrong in Washington, D.C. I think, again, it goes back to making sure we have somebody in Washington who's not going to have their head turned, who's not going to feel obligated to do what the leadership in our party says, who's not going to be concerned about criticism from the liberal media. If you send me to Washington and I'm criticized by the Washington Post or the New York Times, I'll view that as a sign that I'm doing a good job. and I'll view it as a sign, as a badge of honor. I think it's fundamentally important that we recognize we've got to change the way that Washington works, and to do that, you've got to have somebody who can go back there and represent Wyoming and be part of a national coalition and lead a national coalition to get these changes made that are so important.
Thank you. Mr. Pad.
I think it all boils down to a systemic problem of career politicians. Basically, when they go back there and they're looking at being there for 20, 30 years, of course they're not going to vote themselves out of raises, out of pensions and such. We need to, I believe, have a congressional term limit of some sort, and I guess I would be open on an exact number of years, but whatever we would do, in my opinion, I think we would have to use the make it to where it was a total number of years in Congress, not just so many in Senate, so many in the House, and then you still end up with somebody there for 20 years because they served, 12 in each place or something like that. But as far as the retirement funding, I think it should be based on years of service, and there should be congressional term limits to limit that. And they should have to basically put in, help co-fund their retirement just like we do out here in the real world. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pad. Mr. Centney.
Well, since I ran in 2014 and again this time around, I've actually talked about constitutional term limits for members of Congress. Basically no more than 3 in the House and no more than 2 in the Senate. Now, pertaining to their benefits packages, I also have something that's called no work equals no pay. And what that basically does is it says you will get paid $1,000 a day while in session, that's it. Now, in 2013, Congress was in session for 126 days. In 2014, it was only 113 days. And in 2015, it was 132 days, so they worked a little bit more. But in doing so, I believe it'll hold them more accountable, and they'll actually have their feet held to the fire a little bit. I also believe that their raises should be voted on by the general public only during presidential years. And with the 13% approval rating, I don't think they'll be getting a raise anytime soon. Now, dealing with their retirement plans, I believe they need to go into a private 401k system. It shouldn't be the current retirement plan they get. They should also get the same medical care that all of us have to face. Whatever the median national wage is, that's the type of medical care they qualify for. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stubson.
I agree with a lot of what's been said, and I really think that the problem boils down to really 2 things. One is we should not make Congress and incentivize Congress into a career path, and that's really what the pension system does. And the second problem is it divorces Congress from the problems that we have on a day-to-day basis. We struggle to save, week after week for our retirement. If they don't have that problem, how are they supposed to be invested in a solution to long-term retirement issues? We have to go and figure out how we're going to pay our premiums week after week for health care. If they don't have to, how are they invested in a solution to what has become a real nightmare of a health care system? And as with many of the things we've talked about, I've actually got a record on some of these issues. In Wyoming, we have a campaign finance system where at the end of your career, at the end of your term, there's no limits on what you can do with those campaign funds you have. I've sponsored and fought vigorously for a system that ensures accountability, that ensures that people can't just use those funds for whatever they want to, that ensures that there is more integrity in the campaign finance system in Wyoming. So those are things that I've got a record on and that I'm proud of.
Thank you. Mr. Christensen.
I'll use the Obamacare. I mean, we've heard a lot of different good comments, but I'll use the Obamacare example to really kind of illustrate this. And we know that Obamacare passed Congress, and if it's going to apply to the public, it ought to apply to everyone. That includes Congress. We know that Obamacare has reduced options, has reduced access, and cost more. The day those kind of rules that apply to the public also apply to Congress, I think people are more sensitive and they're more open or prone to open it and read it before they vote for it to see what's inside. That's a great illustration to talk about how I think Congress needs to be directly related and connected to the people, and what passes in that body applies to everyone, including them.
Thank you. Mr. Consmo.
About a month ago, I posted a list of things I would do to restore trust in the political system. One of the first things on that list was that I do believe in term limits and that I would limit myself if elected. Number two, I will not accept congressional health care, and I will not accept a congressional pension plan if elected. I also stated that I will not earn any income beyond the congressional salary. It is enough, and my salary will be my salary, and I will not purchase or own any stock in any company or any business enterprise anywhere while in office. And then again, as I mentioned earlier tonight, I will donate 20% of my salary to charity, which will be the 7 community colleges in the state and the University of Wyoming. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rammel.
I got to be honest with you, I don't even know what they get. I know what the salary is, but as far as pension and health care and all of the other benefits, I really don't know. I haven't looked into it, and it's not important to me. I mean, if it's out of control, I certainly would vote to reform it. What's most important to me is that I go back there and I help Wyoming and help the good people of Wyoming that are hurting. That's where I'm putting my efforts. I can support term limits. I think that people go back there for 20, 30 years or more. I think that is extremely excessive. If you can't accomplish something in, say, 8 years in the Congress and 12 in the Senate, then you probably ought to move on. So I do support term limits, and I'm happy to look into all of the other benefits and put them on more of a line with what the average person gets in the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
I believe that we have very excessive corruption in our system, and it starts in Washington, D.C. And if you look at congressional members, I'm an old wrestler, and I can tell you that leadership always starts at the top. If the head is sound, the body is sound. But if the head of an organization is not sound, the body can't be sound. And if you look at Congress right now, they give themselves a guaranteed outcome. So right now they get Social Security and they get a congressional pension plan. And it's just not right. The average person that goes to Congress has a net worth of over $1 million. And for those of us running a congressional race, we know it costs a lot of money, and that's why. And I'll tell you what needs to happen is we need to eliminate congressional pensions, and we can do that because it's a bipartisan issue. We just go back to the constituents of every district and say, you know what, hey, your congressperson thinks they're above you. Also, we need to also implement job performance standards for congressional members. And what needs to happen is every year that a federal Congress does not balance a budget, we need to reduce their pay by 10%. Again, that's a bipartisan issue. Also, federal at-will employment at the federal level is gone crazy. There are over 35,000 federal attorneys in Washington, D.C. Those are not attorneys that actually litigate stuff. Those are just bureaucratic attorneys, and they have a better chance of dying on the job than they do of being fired for incompetence. So again, I will not take a federal pension, and I will go back there and pull the pigs back from the trough. Make sure you vote for me on August 16th.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any candidate for rebuttal? That'll then bring us to our closing statements, and we'll go in reverse order again. Mr. Smith, you'll begin.
Okay. Oh, wait a minute.
You have a 1 minute closing statement.
A 1 minute closing statement?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Judge Neely. She's a judge who was asked in an abstract manner if she would engage in a ceremony that was against her religion. She said she wouldn't. And now they're trying to remove her from her federal judgeship, the state's trying to remove her from her judgeship. I just want to say this, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And we have the same political names, the same political class types, the same legislator types that we keep sending back, and we get the same results. We argue about the same stuff. I can tell you, send a leader to Washington, send me to Washington. I've been a politician for 3 months and 3 days, and I have a comprehensive energy plan that can be rivaled to anybody on this platform. Go to GoCleanAmerica.com and check it out. You can go to my website, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and please vote for me on August 16th, and appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Rammel, your closing statement.
Thank you, and thank you to the people of Wyoming. Thank you for being kind to my family, and thank you for your conservative values. This is a great state made up of very good people and hardworking people I certainly can relate to. My father is a meat cutter. I am a country veterinarian, a little more educated, but he gave me some very good values. Honor, integrity, courage. I strive for these things. And I promise you, if I go back to Congress and get to represent this great state and the great people of Wyoming, I will give you every bit of effort I have. It is my goal. It would be a great honor to serve you and to make your lives better. I truly believe, and I want to reiterate this, that the federal land transfer may be the biggest thing we could ever do for Wyoming, the West, and the United States. It would be the biggest states' rights victory in United States history, and I will put it front and center. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Remmel. Mr. Consmo.
As I've said tonight, I strongly believe that we need to fix our state economy. Nothing in this election is more important. How we fix our state economy begins with this idea: a good representative always listens to the people he represents. Our state and our people always know what's best for our state and our people. I will always listen to you. This is not my campaign, this is our campaign. You and I will always collaborate to lead our state toward long-term solutions. And I will say it again, a good representative is always guided by the people he represents. If you believe in this idea, vote Consmo for Congress in August. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Christensen.
Thank you, everyone, for being here and for listening to us out on the radio waves. You know, as a young guy who grew up in ag and small business, military veteran, Wyoming lawman, elected in the local office and now serving in the state office, I've got a background and I've got a record, and we know how to get the job done. Been tested and been proven to be able to be effective, work together with people, negotiate for winning solutions, and that's what it's going to take in Washington. Today we've heard a lot of talk about fighting and making promises that can't be kept. I believe you work on what you can do, and you work to make a difference, and you try to change things for the better. That's my history, and that's my commitment to you. I've got some great sponsorship and great support out there. I've got some great endorsements. Chris Brano, one of the heroes of Benghazi, he knows me, he's a supporter. Andy Johnson down in the Bridger Valley, battled the APA, he knows me, he's a supporter. It's business leaders, it's ag leaders, it's the small folks around Wyoming that know my history and are supporting me, and I'd ask for your support and your vote in August. Leland Christensen, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen. Mr. Stubson.
And I'd also like to thank you for your attention this afternoon. And you know, it's been mentioned a couple of times, but 1 in 435, that's what we're looking to do in the U.S. House of Representatives. And that means a couple of things. First, it means that it's too much is at stake to roll the dice. Too much is at stake to see if somebody can actually do more than make campaign promises. And that's why I think it's important to send somebody with a proven record on accomplishing things for Wyoming. The other thing that's important is to send somebody that's got a stake in the future of our state. And I'll tell you that everything I have is because of the blessings of this state and the opportunities that have been afforded to me in this state. And my future is directly tied to the future of this state. That's why I ask for your vote on August 16th. Please vote Stubson for Congress, and we'll look forward to making a change together.
Thank you. Mr. Centney.
First, I'd like to thank all of you in attendance. I'd also like to give a special thanks to the Goshen County Republican Party, Chairman Steinmetz and Representative Steinmetz. Thank you for putting this on. I also want to thank everybody listening on the radio. Being able to represent Wyoming isn't all just about one person. It's about all of us as a community. When I ran in 2014, I understood that, and running here in 2016, I understand that now. And it's going to be big boots to fill. Congressman Lum has served this state proudly. While we didn't agree 100% of the time, I don't think anybody ever does. I have a very diverse background. I'm a United States Marine. I've managed multi-million-dollar businesses. I currently work in corrections, volunteer firefighter, and I have a jack-of-all-trades demeanor and background. And I believe what Wyoming needs is somebody with that vast knowledge base to serve them in Washington, and maybe a little Goshen County common sense. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pad.
Thank you. It's been great being here. There's a lot of candidates up here. It may seem undaunting to try to pick one, but really I believe you only have two choices. You can vote to continue status quo with some of our candidates, or you can vote for positive change. Now, if you're part of the approximately 15% that thinks Congress has been doing a mighty fine job and you want to see the status quo continue, if you want to continue to recycle the same politicians, same political ideas, political elites, if you think Washington's in shortage of attorneys, we certainly have a slate of candidates up here who fit the bill for you. But if you're like me and you're part of the 85% that feels that Congress has been about as messed up as a soup sandwich, then I'm going to ask you to vote for me, Paul Pat, on August 16th. Because what I believe that Wyoming deserves right now is a candidate or a representative that's going to be a strong leader and a fighter, someone that'll fight for the Wyoming jobs that have been stolen by this administration, someone will stand up in support of our Wyoming families, and someone will stand up and defend the freedoms, the liberties, and the ethics that are the core foundation of Wyoming values. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pad. Ms. Cheney.
I too want to thank the Goshen County Republicans for putting this forum on. It's been terrific to have the opportunity to talk to folks here as well as all across the state. This is a crucial election. Everything that we hold dear as a state is at risk and is under assault. And we've got to make sure that we send someone to Washington who has the ability, who has the experience, who has the knowledge to stand up and fight on a national level for that. When people tell you that they've got records here in the state, you got to ask two questions. Number one, I would say, go research the records. Look at what those people actually stand for. And number two, ask yourself, we are at a crisis moment as a state. So anybody who tells you that they've been fighting effectively for Wyoming in the state legislature for the last decade, you got to ask them, what have the results been? You know, right now, today, we're at a crisis moment. And while we're facing these threats to our freedom from Washington, we're also facing something that hasn't been mentioned tonight, and that's threat from radical Islamic terrorism, which is a graver threat than any we've seen before. We need to send someone to Washington who can make sure that our military gets the resources it needs and that we adopt the policies necessary to keep the nation safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cheney. With that, that will conclude our forum here tonight. The county party, we'd like to, on behalf of the county party, we'd like to extend our thank you to you, the candidates on stage, for taking time off the campaign trail to attend this forum and speak to the electorate of Wyoming. We'd also like to thank Eastern Wyoming College for providing the venue, KGOS, KERM for broadcasting, along with our partner at KPIN in Pinedale. A special thank you to Aaron Bamer, our technical staff, along with Doug Chamberlain. We'd also like to thank you, those here in attendance tonight, and the listening audience at home. We actually have a short road to the primary in August, and it's our hope that this forum helps you make your decision on who to vote for a little bit easier. My name is Shane Victrin, and it's been an honor as your moderator for this forum tonight. And I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you, the candidates. Thank you at home. With that, we'll conclude our events here tonight. This will conclude our broadcast as well. Thank you, and good night.
Like you say and spell your name first?
Sure. Tim Stubson. My last name's S-T-U-B-S-O-N.
Okay, thank you. Being a solo seat in the House of 435, how do you best represent the state of Wyoming?
Well, I think it takes a couple of things. One, it takes being focused on the issues that are important to the state of Wyoming, and that means you know those issues and you know the people of Wyoming. But it also takes building coalitions, both in places familiar and maybe unfamiliar. And for me, the thing I've been talking to people across the state is the fact that in the legislature for the last 9 years, I've got a record of building those coalitions and getting things done.
Okay, how long have you lived in Wyoming?
So all my life, born and raised here, and grew up in Casper, spent a little time in Thermopolis, and then went to high school in Cody. I've been back in Casper now 20 years.
Okay, and what is your occupation now?
So I'm a small business attorney. I work with really businesses all across the state on dealing with the day-to-day issues of doing business.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks. That was it.
I don't know, if we got to flip around, well, we may. Okay, being the, spell your name.
Pad, P-A-A-D.
Okay, sounds good. Being the solo seat in a House of 435, how do you feel you will best represent the state of Wyoming?
Well, one person obviously can't make a lot of changes by themselves, so you have to be able to build alliances and coalitions. And that's part of my plan when I go to Washington, is to use the lag time between the time the House is sworn in and the time the President's sworn in. And then he's going to have obviously a little time for it and get his cabinet put in. During that time, we have to build coalitions. And my plan to do that is to start with representatives from like-minded states with multiple energy sources in their state that's being hit by this target that's been on the energy industry, and start from there and build out from that and build alliances so that when the new president is inaugurated and he does get his cabinet in place, then we can hit the ground running. May even be able to get this coal moratorium done before that, because it's just such a ridiculous, unwarranted item. The president could probably do that as soon as he gets in office, I believe. But that's how we're going to proceed when we get to Washington, is to build the alliances and coalitions. I liken it to putting like a drop of stone in the water, and then the ripples go out. Well, you start with your core constituents or your core colleagues, and then work out from there, and build and build. So.
And how long have you lived in Wyoming?
A little over 32 years. I wasn't born in Wyoming. I'm a Wyomingite by choice rather than by chance. Nobody asked me during the first 9 months of my life where I wanted to be born. So, but my wife and I were here in the early 70s, and we left for a little while, and then we came back in 1984 and been here ever since, and raised our family here and worked here and created our life here. So.
And what is your current occupation now?
Right now, I'm a director of safety and personnel and compliance. For a trucking company that hauls hazardous material, hazmat. So I deal with federal regulations on a daily basis. I mean, that's all I have done for decades now is dealt with it. I had my own trucking company for several years, and I sold it off in 2012 after Obama's second election. I wasn't sure I could go through another 4 years of his as a business owner, but so I felt firsthand the crunch that these overburdensome regulations from these federal agencies can put on a small business and such, and that's why we have to get there, and we have to have Congress take back their legislative authority so that they can rein in these agencies like the EPA and such, and like that, Department of Interior.
Well, thank you very much, sir. Yeah, we're the one that asks all the hard questions, of course.
That's a real friend. Leland Christensen.
Okay. If you want to spell that for me, sir.
Leland Christensen, LelandChristенsen.
Being the solo seat of 435 in the House, how will you best represent the state of Wyoming?
Well, I think this is exactly one of the things that sets me apart from this crowd. I've worked in the legislature. I've been a county commissioner. I understand what it takes to work together to get things accomplished. And I have that track record. We hear a lot of people talking about what they're going to do. Only a few of us have ever done it. In this race, I've got the background. You've got to be able to work together with people. You've got to be able to negotiate for the best possible position for Wyoming, and you have to know when to walk away. But I'm confident with a great working relationship with our current delegation, Senator Barrasso, Senator Enzi, to be able to jump in there, use what I've learned in the legislature, use the lessons as a small businessman and a county commissioner and as an old military fella to build voting blocks, bring people together, and help Congress understand that when Wyoming wins, America wins, and vice versa. And so I think we've got a real shot at this, and I'm an optimist. I'm going down to Washington thinking we can make a positive difference and change things for Wyoming in this country.
How long have you lived in Wyoming for?
I'm fourth generation. I've lived here all of my life except for, I think it was 8 years as a kid when my parents were teaching school up in Alaska in the bush. But we moved back to Wyoming in 1971. I was raised in this country before that, and it's where I've raised my family, and we remain here, and we're not going anywhere. This is a great state.
And what is your current occupation?
Right now I'm a retired lawman, but on the side I do a little auctioning, a lot of public service, help the fire department raise a little money, people get in trouble, have a fire, those kind of things. and we sell a few livestock, little animals at the over our 4-H sale. So auctioning on the side, but pretty much in the Wyoming legislature right now, and that does occupy the majority of my time. I serve in the Senate. I've been there 6 years. 2 years as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Serve on the Ag Committee. Before that, on the Travel and Tourism Committee. And so we've got a real broad experience and set of skills as far as comes to knowing and representing this state.
Okay, thank you, sir.
That was 2 questions.
Basic questions, okay. If you could spell your name, sir.
R-E-X-R-A-M-M-E-L-L, Rex Rammel.
Being the sole seat for Wyoming with a House of 435, how do you best represent the state of Wyoming?
Well, you got to be a strong personality. So when you speak, they listen. And the other thing is you got to be able to establish credibility. And that's going to be a problem for some of the other candidates in the race because this is a public land state. I'm a veterinarian by profession, work with ranchers, farmers on a daily basis, and also worked with a lot of miners and foresters, and spent my whole life on the public land. So when I stand up and speak in Congress, they'll give me some respect. But if you don't know anything about the public land issues, it's going to be hard to get their respect, and they won't listen to you.
Okay. And how long have you lived in Wyoming for?
Officially since 2012, but I grew up on the Idaho-Wyoming line. I spent a good part of my life in Wyoming. So I feel like I know the issues very well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, sir. Okay, sir. Okay, could you spell your name, sir?
Yeah, it's D-A-R-I-N-S-M-I-T-H.
Oh, okay. Being the sole seat of 430 in the House, how do you feel you will represent Wyoming best?
Well, I'm going to export Wyoming values to Washington. And my Wyoming values are as many of your viewers out there. I am pro-God, pro-family, pro-gun, pro-business, pro-oil and gas, pro-coal, pro-agriculture, pro-veteran, and I'm for every right that the Constitution guarantees us. And I believe that our best days are ahead if we can pull back an overreaching federal government.
And how long have you lived in Wyoming for?
My entire life. I am 42 years old. I ride for the brand. I've chose to live here. I chose to go to school here. I raised my family here. All of my children have been born here, and I married my wife here.
Okay, and I lost my train of thought there. What is your current occupation, sir?
I'm an executive for a national nonprofit organization that drills about 1,000 water wells a year for people without fresh water and sends doctors on about 1,000 medical missions a year. And I'm an expert at finding simple solutions to complex problems, and we have complex problems in Washington, D.C., and I'm the solution.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and spell your name, sir.
My name's Jason Sentney, S-E-N-T-E-N-E-Y. I think he's got a graphic for that one.
Okay, being the sole seat of 435 House members, how do you feel best you represent the state of Wyoming?
Well, I believe growing up in Wyoming and earning those strong Wyoming values, you get to know that sense of community, you get to know that neighborly spirit, and you get to know how things work and how the people are in Wyoming. Wyoming's a state where if somebody's broken down alongside the road, you have 5, 6, 7, 8 cars that pull over and help that individual. And it's those values that I learned growing up right here in Goshen County, as well as those type of values that I carried with me into the Marine Corps.
And how long have you lived in Wyoming for?
Altogether, over half my life, over 20 years.
Okay, and what is your current occupation, sir?
I'm a correctional officer. I'm also a field training officer out there, as well as a public information officer. I'm also a volunteer firefighter, and in my spare time I serve at the Governor's pleasure on the Air Quality Small Business Compliance Advisory Panel.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And sir, how long were you in the Marine Corps?
Well, I was in the Marines altogether for about 4 years. I left after my first stint. I was actually medicaled out, and then September 11th happened, and they needed well-trained individuals with special skills, and I was called back, and again I was called back in 2003.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, tell me when. Okay. Ethics was a big discussion tonight. What is your faith and how will it affect your decisions?
I think my faith is everything. That's the bedrock of who I am. And I think that my faith in Jesus Christ is what was the foundation of how I make my decisions. So when I go back to Washington, I'll make my decisions with the Bible in one hand and the Constitution in the other.
Any other rebuttal from this evening?
Rebuttal.
Any sort of rebuttal comment of tonight?
You know what? We didn't get asked about Judge Neely, and I think it's very important that people understand that our religious freedoms are on the brink in this nation. If in Wyoming, a judge can actually lose her judgeship for saying that she would not participate in a particular type of ceremony, that's a religious litmus test, very similar to what they use in the USSR for people to hold office. I am very passionate about this, and Judge Neely, if you can hear me, I'm going to fight for you.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, and could I get your name and spelling?
Liz Cheney, Cheney.
Okay, being the sole seat of 435 in the House, how will you have an impact on Wyoming?
Well, I think it's crucially important because we only have one seat, that we can't send somebody to Washington who's just going to be an observer or somebody who's just going to cast votes. We've got to have somebody representing us who can hit the ground running on day one, somebody who can make sure that we bring the kind of national focus and attention to our issues that they require. You know, we can win the war on coal. We can win the EPA's war on the West, but we can't do it alone. We've got to be able to reach, to build coalitions that bring a national attention and focus to those issues. The facts are on our side and the Constitution is on our side, but it requires leadership and it requires experience. It requires the experience to be able to talk about these issues and educate people on a national level, regardless of the criticism and the attacks that come, but to have the courage of your convictions to know that you'll do what's right, no matter the criticism, no matter the attacks, no matter the pressure, that you represent the people of Wyoming, and that's the kind of representative and the kind of leader that I'll be.
How long have you lived in Wyoming for?
I've lived in Wyoming off and on, my whole life. We've been back now for 4 years. We've got 5 kids, and 4 of them are in school here. Our 5th graduated from college this year. But my family is I'm 4th generation on my mom's side. When my dad was elected to Congress, I was 12, and then we started splitting our time between Wyoming and Washington. But Wyoming has always been my home on both sides of my family. It's where my roots are, and I'm really honored to be raising my kids here now.
Okay, and current occupation?
I'm a mom of 5, which is the most important thing I do. I also was a Fox News contributor until I stopped that to run for office, and I'm on the board of directors at the International Board of Advisors at the University of Wyoming. And before I began running for office, I also was the chairman of a nonprofit organization that was focused on national security and making sure that we got the word out about the importance of defending our nation and the threats we face and what it's going to take to be able to defeat those threats.
Ethics were a issue tonight that was spoken about. What is your faith and how will that affect your decisions?
Yeah, no, I mean, my faith is very strong, and I think that anybody who is in public office has to, rely on divine guidance, has to rely on prayer. I certainly will. I know that, for example, when my dad had health problems that he's had over the years, every time people would say to me across Wyoming, we're praying for you, we're praying for your family, there's nothing that means more. So I believe deeply in the power of prayer. I believe deeply in our freedom of conscience, guaranteed by the Constitution, and I think our elected leaders have to be willing to fight for that and to defend it. And I certainly will rely on prayer, in this position if I'm so honored to be elected.
One more question. What sort of influence does your dad have on
My dad is somebody that I admire tremendously and is obviously somebody that, I feel very honored to be his daughter. But this is my race. It's a race that I'm running on my own, that I know, is mine to be able to prove myself in this race, not as his daughter. But I'm really, really honored and proud of his service to the nation. And one of the biggest lessons that I've learned from him is this lesson of the courage of your convictions and what it really means. No matter how many people are criticizing you, you've got to be willing to take that and stand up and do what you know is right. And that's what I hope to be able to do for Wyoming.
Okay, any further comment or rebuttal?
Just wonderful to be here in Goshen County. Wonderful to be back, and I look forward to a great and lively race towards the primary and then beyond until November. And everybody ought to get out and vote on August 16th.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Great. Thanks for talking to you guys.
Thank you.
What's our issue of the day?
Just basic follow-up is what it is. And a little bit on ethics as well. Excuse me. I'll start over. Ethics was a discussion tonight. What is your faith, and how will it determine your values and decisions?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Ethics was a point of discussion tonight. How will your faith determine your decisions?
You know, I think a lot about ethics and morals weighs right into this, and it's important to know how a person acts when everybody isn't watching, and when you don't have the spotlight on you, and what do you do in your private life, and what do you do when there are no witnesses. And I think a good, solid, conservative, moral, and ethical background makes that difference. And it teaches us a little of that golden rule. Treat other people the way you want to be treated, but don't sit there and wait for the accolades. Just do the right thing and then go on about your business. And that's one of the key, I think, elements in any leadership position, and especially in politics. We need to worry less about who gets the credit and more about getting the job done.
Thank you. Any other follow-up or rebuttal?
You know, as for rebuttal, again, look at what people have done. If you want to know what they're going to do, look at what they've done. It's easy to make promises. It's easy to make big commitments. But when you look at a track record, when you look at character and commitment, and in this case, we're talking about public service, look at what people have done on their own time and on their own dime, and then you get a sense of who's actually going to be there when the lights aren't shining on them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, you did? Yeah. Oh, good. Well, good.
Hey, yeah, see you around.
Awesome.
Sounds good. All righty.
All right.
So, ethics were an issue that was tonight. Could you explain your faith background and how that will affect your decisions?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one of those things I think about politicians is that everybody should take what they say about faith with a grain of salt, because we've all seen people make promises and walk a different walk. And that's one of the great things about Wyoming, because certainly faith is at the center of my life and how I try to make decisions, but you shouldn't trust me on that. You should talk to the people that know me around the state, to my friends and my church and my colleagues and those sorts of folks. And that's the unique thing about Wyoming, is that we can hold people accountable to their word, and I think that's a good thing.
Any other follow-up or rebuttal from tonight?
You know, for me, it's a great opportunity to talk to people about how to build a better nation and a better state. And, you know, I think that's what people are excited about, and that's what people are interested in.
Well, thank you very much.
Hey, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Oh, hey, we're doing some video way back from high school. Okay. So it's okay. Ethics and morals were a hot issue tonight. Could you explain what your faith is and how you'll make decisions based upon that faith?
I'm a very religious man. I believe without God's help, the United States would not even exist. And I support what the founder said, that the Constitution was made only for moral people. But it seems to me like we've forgotten the Constitution, and we forgot who instituted it. And consequently, the United States is in terrible trouble. And I think that's the reason. I think the solution is just getting back to the Constitution as it was originally designed. And the other thing that's really important to me is honor and integrity. Whether you're running for Congress or you're running for city council, a person should be honorable, honest, and not try to deceive people into thinking that there's somebody that they're not. I try to live that standard. I do the best I can, and I expect others to do the same.
Any other rebuttal or comment?
No. That's it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moral and ethics were a big issue tonight. Could you explain your faith and how your faith will determine your decisions?
Well, I do believe we have one God. Part of my upbringing was a Catholic upbringing, but I spent a lot of time at the Baptist church. And I believe we all have one God. Many different religions call him by different names, but I believe there's only one God. What we need to do is live by the golden rule, embrace the 10 Commandments, and basically look inside yourself. Sometimes there's that little voice in the back of your head, and a lot of people call it a conscience or whatever, but I honestly think that's divine intervention telling you this is wrong, don't do this. I believe he speaks to us all. We just got to take time to listen. And that's where my faith comes from. And when I look at the rest of society and everything else, I think about the fact that we're slowly, as a nation, veering away from that. I understand the acceptance and some of those other things, but you also got to look, does the sin justify the end? And it doesn't.
Any other further comment or rebuttal from tonight?
I thought the event went really well. A lot of the good questions were asked. I wish they would have emphasized on Wyoming jobs a little bit more, and I also wish they would have asked a question about immigration. By talking about immigration, it really impacts Wyoming, and it's one of the top 3 issues that people are concerned about here in Wyoming.
Thank you very much.